I'm here in Nepal this time to work with our nonprofit treasure caretaker training, and we're finishing up a workshop for conservators, which is conservation of traditional and contemporary tanka and pawa. I actually have been working in Nepal since 1970, which is 55 years and almost 56, and I've seen a lot of changes. I'm very grateful to RYI and Dion for inviting me to do this. And I'm grateful to my Buddhist teachers for supporting me and giving me guidance all of these years in this work. In 1970, I started my research. How can I put it? The sacred is intangible, but sacred art is tangible. And as a conservator, I have to work with the manifestation of the sacred and in terms of tanka, statues, texts, and it's very delicate. And as a conservator, I work from a scientific point of view, which means that we apply scientific principles. So I've been working with translators a long time, and it's a rare translator that can have a true appreciation of the sacred, which most do, and also be able to translate our scientific terms in a very basic way that monks and nuns in the monasteries I teach in find it really interesting because we specialize in the low cost and practical approach to conservation. So this is me in 1970 in Delhi, and that's where I started using translators for preservation purposes. In 1970, I encountered the previous Karmapa. I also spent quite a number of hours with Gelek Rinpoche, who at the time was the husband of the director of Tibet House in Delhi. He spoke perfect English. And he helped me a lot in the discussion of fakes that were being just brought into the market, fake sacred art at that time in 1970. He was, of course, fluent in English. I also interviewed extensively the previous Kamtrul Rinpoche from Tashijiang, who was a master painter. And it's rare to find a great yogi who's also a master painter. And I interviewed him extensively, but it was through a translator, one of his monks, who had the perfect attitude for a translator. Yeah. Then I was invited in 1991 to Rumtek Monastery to document the Tanka collection there by Jamgon Khantrul Rinpoche III and also anyone else that was there at the time. This was right before he died, and Jalsop Rinpoche was there, and it was a very important time, and I did document the tankas and other things. And of course, Jamgon Khantrul Rinpoche and Jalsop Rinpoche spoke perfect English, so me and my children would talk with them about the work. But others didn't, and we would use monks for translation. And my preferred translators usually are monks and nuns. There's Jalsop Rinpoche with my daughter at her age at the time. In 2005, I first started teaching conservation of monastery treasures in Bhutan, and there were no mobile phones, no cell phones, no smartphones, so we wrote everything. And the nuns spoke English. And the ones that didn't, the two that spoke perfect English translated. And they had no trouble with the scientific terms. A few years later, I ran this workshop in Sikkim. And it was for monks, nuns, and some cultural workers. You could see the banner. That was at Namgyal Institute of Tibetology. And the first translator we had from Namgyal Institute was a Tibetan scholar, because we thought that all of the monks and nuns would prefer to learn in Tibetan language. However, that wasn't the case at all. So he was dismissed, and this monk took over, and he translated in their language of choice, which is always the best, which was Nepali. So I would speak in English and he would translate into Nepali. And if there was one person who didn't know Nepali, he would translate into Tibetan for that. So again, monks and nuns are my favorite translators. Following that, I was invited by His Holiness Karmapa to teach at the Munlam, and I was teaching nuns about preservation, a special workshop. And it was all nuns. However, our translator was a monk from Pulahari. There he is translating for all the nuns. And he was a really good translator. He had actually been a participant in my conservation program, so he knew all the terminology, and he was wonderful. However, subsequently, he stopped being a monk. So he wasn't translating for us anymore, unfortunately. Following that, I went back to Bhutan and ran this session at the Royal University of Bhutan. And it was with UNESCO because I have a small, humble nonprofit. And the UNESCO person instructed the translator that they were to translate everything into Hindi and not to translate anything anyone said that wasn't in English into English. So therefore, I would know nothing what anyone was saying, but he would sort of be in control. So I thought this wouldn't really work. So I summarily dismissed that idea and asked this Department of Cultural Properties wonderful worker who was a participant to translate. She translated English to Zonka, Zonka to English. She was very wonderful. But it's very interesting. It was then I understood the politics of translation. I've given many workshops for monks and nuns, but this is interesting because we're talking about translation. Here, this translator was for a workshop I gave at Tergar up on the hill. And he was a native speaker, and I'd like you to hear his translation. Okay, so the point of this translation is that my co-teacher couldn't understand a word he was saying. So he was fluent in English and got the scientific terms, but she could not understand his English at all. So that didn't work for my co-teacher. Next, I'd like to say that I began by thanking my Buddhist teachers, and I work closely with Buddhist teachers to guide what I teach, how I work in monasteries, everything. And we have Buddhist teachers on our board of the directors of nonprofit, etc. And I find quite to people's surprise that often when I'm working directly with a Buddhist teacher like this, His Holiness Karmapa, they understand English perfectly well and even the scientific terms. However, when they're having audiences and interviews and gives and talks, they often use a translator. So this is when I found out that there was kind of double standard with great teachers, that if they really wanted to talk with you and have an efficient meeting without anyone else in the room and just get down to work, then they would just speak really good English. And he would read all the documents in my computer and everything. And I found this again and again with great teachers I have the honor to serve. I also work in museums in the West, I like to say. And sometimes I have to speak Spanish or French, which I can sort of manage. But here I am, more recently in Yushu, on the Tibetan Plateau in China. The first time I went I was invited by Khenpos and Rinpoches of remote monasteries to teach a conservation workshop on risk assessment for monastery treasures and documentation. So here we are, and Buddhist Door Global was kind enough to write an article about this. And who do you see in the forefront of this picture? You see my favorite translator. She had never encountered the scientific terms before. And some of the Rinpoches and Khenpos had dialect accents and understandings. But it was such an important event because I was the first conservator invited into the region to work directly with monastics from these remote monasteries. It was such an important event that she rose to the occasion and was an ideal translator, especially because they brought the treasures of their own monasteries to the workshop for me to give advice on and for them to practice documentation and risk assessment on their own monastery treasures. This was very, very important. And we needed an excellent translator. And here she is. Here's a Khenpo and a Rinpoche doing a documentation on a very special tanka from their monastery, remote monastery. And here one brought this very, very rare Bunpo text very early on birch bark. And birch bark texts are very, very rare. And once again, our amazing translator rose to the occasion. And she's just delightful to work with, and she has devotion. I mean, you could have a scholastic translator, PhD from someplace in the US, who translates perfectly the scientific terms without any devotion. There isn't the right tone. The next time I returned to the Tibetan Plateau was the rare occasion to serve my Buddhist teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, in his current form. My wonderful translator was in Dubai trying out a different life. So she was not available. And the first thing that Trungpa Rinpoche said when I got to Surmang was, where's your translator? So he was asking for her. So how did I work there all that time without a translator? And the way I did it was by phone. I would call her up at all hours to translate for Trungpa Rinpoche directly and for his brother. And she was simply amazing. At times when she was definitely sleeping, I used a different translator who also was amazing, but it was all done on the phone. And one of them translated an entire 1.5 hour PowerPoint presentation for Trungpa Rinpoche, translating what I said. I'm so in awe. If anyone here, has anyone here been to the Surmang region and monastery? It's like this. And we're returning in May.
Yes, I've been
Actual
there.
hands-on treatment. And who will we be bringing? If she can have some time off from RYI, we'll be bringing our translator because he asks for her. This is Surmang, and that's the Surmang town. In the monastery, we did documentation, but also very simple mens on the tankas. And that is Trungpa Rinpoche's brother, who, when the translator wasn't available or when we were working all day, he would just take out his translation app on his phone. And actually, it worked really well if you speak plain language. Next, I went to speak at the Palace Museum in Beijing, which is very different from a monastery on the Tibetan Plateau. And it's a different experience of translation because it's simultaneous translation. Because with non-simultaneous, it takes double the time. But with simultaneous, there I was speaking in English, and people in the audience were listening in Mandarin and other languages. So that isn't always possible, but when it is, it works very well. But then again, the reason it doesn't work well, because I have no idea how they're translating what I'm saying. My last example of translation, and this is interesting, I worked at the Rubin Museum. I did a workshop there for treasure caretakers right before it closed. And one of the things we did, we offered our services to the community, the larger community, diaspora community in Queens. That included a Nepali youth camp, and it also included the Sherpa Temple, which is full of elders who have lived there a long time in Queens and don't speak a word of English. So this was in the US, and I was speaking very New York English, very New York American, because I can switch my dialects. And I had a friend, Tashi, and she was translating into the Tibetan language for them. and this was in New York. So that was a totally different experience. Now I'm going to hand over the floor to my favorite translator, who is returning with us to Sermang in May, if possible. And I'd like her to present to you her point of view about this type of translation, because she was trained as a professional translator. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
So, hello everyone. My name is Beman Kanjo. And first of all, I would like to appreciate all of you for coming here today at ROI to attend our lecture. I really appreciate it. And this is my first time in Nepal actually, and it's quite amazing. Um, uh, Introducing by Anne, I came to here at ROI to study. I met like a lot of wonderful teachers who are guiding me, and I met a lot of students from all over the world that we are aiming at learning and discussing Himalayan language and Buddhist. That's very wonderful. I really appreciate that. And I also appreciate Rinpoche to fund this school so that we have a place to learn. Yes, and I would like to appreciate my TCT colleague members because they were supporting me all the time, encouraging me. So give me a lot of energy, power, sort of thing. And thank you for attending this lecture again. I really appreciate it. And I am from Yushu, a region of China. Um, I was grown up in a Buddhist family, so later on, I attended my university. I studied English and Chinese translation. In that way, I have inspired to become a translator, or more like an interpreter. Then, by chance, in 2023, I was reading the book of Chujong Trungpa Rinpoche's, not a lot, but like two or three of them, which inspired me a lot and kind of changed my life. So I got more devoted and have more interest in on Buddhist. And then later on, it's just like very karmic fate. It was in 2024. I met Anne. She came to Yushu with to conduct her training project, treasure care training project. And I was introduced by one of my friends to Anne to being as a interpreter and translator. That was very different because my previous translation experience, or let's say interpretation experience, was majority in English and Chinese. So you could see it's just Chinese and English. And working with TCT, I start my first experience to translate Tibetan and English. And that was really an unusual occasion for me because it's Dharma. It's very auspicious and such a nice chance. It's from Tibetan language and English. But for me, although I'm a Buddhist, technically I didn't like have didn't learn a lot of terminologies. So it's quite challenging, especially you need to like do real-time translation. So it's quite challenging, but it's very fun. I One second. Yes. So in 2023 in Yushu, TCT were conducting a Tanka and sculpture status preservation project for the monks all over the Yushu. Yushu is a region of China. in Kamba area. So there are a lot of monasteries. So we invited the monks to learn how to preserve and to do risk assessment, to do documentation for the treasures in the monasteries, which was very practical because now the monasteries in my place, they have professional monks know how to protect, how to preserve those auspicious statues and tankas so that they can pass by generation to generation. It was very nice. And by that chance, I met Chusum Chombar Muchin, this life of Chujong Chombar Muchin, which was totally out of my expectation. I was like, wow, is it real? I can barely speak, although we just kind of had a lunch because he was in her way to somewhere, I don't know, but we had a lunch. But it's very magical. And uh, both Anne and I, we were like bursting tears, kind of holding our tears because it was very nice. And I feel like it's more comic. So we conducted the treasure care training there. And later in September of 2024, I went to Dubai because I got a job at the airport, working as a sales. Well, I thought it would be very wonderful to see the world outside because I had a dream before when I was young to travel around the world, but things didn't seem so. But I think this is a really like turning point of my life. I got a lot because you can really know the meaningless of the materialistic world by experience it. It's totally different from what your parents or what your relatives taught you because experiences are precious. And during that period of time, um, I also got the chance to do remote translation for An and Chomaramuchin in Sarma Monastery, which was more challenging because I need to deal with my time zone and because I don't know why in Dubai it's the FaceTime, it's just doesn't work there. So we can only call by phone where I cannot see the tankas and statues. I only like Anna will describe it and I need to kind of visualize in it. And sometimes the internet goes really bad. And sometimes I need to translate during like kind of midnight, not too late, but yeah, it's challenging. And the second day I have to go work. But it was amazing because I feel like by that point I was kind of feeling, okay, I need something maybe more grounding because, well, life is short and you cannot just lost in this materialistic world. And it's by that chance Anne introduced me, RI, she introduced to me Diane, and she gave me a lot of good advices. So I came here to study translation. It's very nice. I loved it here, Nepal and RI. I met so many friends and yeah. So, of course, there were challenges during my translation because it's very different from Chinese. In Chinese, we just speak Mandarin. There are no like dialects, so-called dialects. But in my area, like people speak kind of different dialect. It's not that hard, but sometimes you need to be really careful, pay attention. And as I mentioned, there are some terminologies which is hard for me because I'm just a beginner. It's my first time experience. I was excited. Meanwhile, I was kind of, oh, what should I do? Kind of lost. And it's a bit pressured, but much more fun. Uh, I think remote translation was much more pressured. And I said, as I said before, there are those difficulties and challenges, so-called, that I met. And there were times that I need to translate text, which was more challenging. So I kind of asked help from my mother and my sister. So they were checking me to see if there's any grammatical mistakes. But okay, this is some terms that I made by that time for Tanka. Like, and by doing this, I realized that there are a lot of things I need to learn. First, of course, I get closer to Dharma and I met my guru there. It's very precious because I never expected to meet Trungpa in real life. It's very auspicious. I was very happy and overwhelmed. And I realized that I need to learn a lot, both in English and Tibetan for those terminologies, and also Dharma, although I'm Buddhist, but I don't really get deep into Dharma. And I also get experiences. So it's kind of planted a seed. Then I kind of came here. Uh, I think I will meet a lot of challenges during my process of learning, of course. Mm, it's challenging because there are like students very advanced and like people like me just kind of started. Somehow it doesn't discourage me because I believe as long as I'm here alive, I will get chance to learn as long as I'm willing to. And most importantly, I have my teachers, I have my school, I have my TCT members, and I have my guru with me. So, which makes me very faithful. Although I'm not doing that, like, I'm not the best translator, like I mentioned, but she chose me, and it's kind of destined. And I hope I will really learn and get improved here at RI. And yeah, that's my story working as a translator in Dharma with Tibetan language and English language. So I would like to hear from your side of story if you have any experience, and also you could ask questions. Yes, thank you very much.
So some questions. I have a few actually. So we heard about scientific terms. What kind of scientific term do you use in conservation? And when you do your workshop in conservations, um, you talked about risk assessment and documentation. What else is there in conservation in monasteries?
We believe in damage prevention so that the sacred art that still exists, especially historic, will last not for this generation or the next, but for hundreds of years for future generations, uh, and carry the blessings for future generations. And material objects, everything else, deteriorate. And it's quite possible to slow deterioration by simple principles of changing temperature and relative humidity, of different kinds of handling, for example, of tanka, different kind of storage, how to work with pest infestations, including monkeys and rats, where in an area we're not allowed to kill anything. So it's called integrated pest management, where you clean a lot and you're always watching for nests. Then you just carry them outside. And we also are very attuned to light damage And you could have, for example, very simple shades put on the windows to cut down the UV and brightness of light coming in during the light months, the months where there's light, and the months where there is monsoon. There are ways we can modulate the damage caused by monsoon. And for example, plastic on tankas is not one way to do it. That just causes a lot of mold growth. So risk assessment is applied to buildings, to cities, to preparing for emergencies. And for monasteries, we request them to have an emergency plan, like who's going to be the team leader and where will you take objects when it's necessary to remove them from your monastery if it's on fire or hurt from an earthquake. So it's a lot of planning, and planning needs updating. And without a plan, I've seen monasteries burst into flames and monks either die or get terrible burns running back into the monastery to save the treasures. Because if you have a plan like a triage, which are the most important monastery treasures? Who's going to save them? And it's always people first, people's lives first, and then the treasures, which is sometimes hard to explain to monastics. But with a plan, it's much more safe. The reason for documentation is that if a sacred artwork gets destroyed, or if it's stolen, there's a lot more theft going on these days. If it's stolen, you can prove ownership with documentation. And if it encounters disaster, you'll have a description of it for future generations. And that includes interviews of the elders in the community, both elders in the community and monastic elders. We interview them what they know about certain treasures in the monastery or community. This is really important. So with risk assessment, specifically for the monastery situation, and with documentation, we can go quite a distance in preserving sacred art treasures to last into future generations. And that's the goal.
And scientific terms?
Yes, I have a master's in science, and we have the scientific approach, but I prefer to have everything in a very comprehensible language. So if we're talking about temperature and relative humidity, it's something that most people can relate to. And if we're talking about earthquakes and aftershocks and tremors, they can relate to that. So I make it a point to keep up to date with the latest scientific advancements and to very carefully translate all of that into real language for real people.
So, hello? Yes, okay. I have a question. So, how do you deal with like consecrated holy objects and maybe restoring them or this kind of stuff? Do you have to is it like how do you deal with that? Because it's consecrated, you know what I mean?
I do know.
Yeah.
First of all, I wouldn't enter a monastery unless I was invited, usually by the head of the lineage. I've been doing this a long time, and if they feel comfortable inviting me in to work with empowered objects, then I'll do so. And I'm grateful. In terms of restoration, conservation is generally split into preservation and restoration. And I 100% believe in preservation and prevention of future damage. And in terms of restoration, there's no need to make historic blessed objects look like if you walked into a Western museum for the Great Masters Gallery where everything looks perfect. It's not an aesthetic thing. They're historic. And so I don't believe in over-restoration of blessed objects. Definitely not. That's why tanka painters, for example, were called in to create a new tanka to make the iconography more clear. And these days we use digital restoration for that. And I'd love to give another talk on that, digital restoration. So there's no need to actually harm an empowered sacred art object for restoration, like you'd find in a Western art museum for an oil painting. There's no need for that. It's just not respectful.
You talked about mending. So light mending, there's still some intervention happening. With colors also, or with fabric?
Yeah.
Can you say a little more?
Well, for example, a tanka is meant to be used. It has a purpose, which is display iconography and carry blessings. And if its mounting is torn into shreds because of handling or rats have eaten it, we can do stabilization treatment, which is a conservation word, stabilization. So you're stabilizing the condition so it can continue to serve its purpose in a monastery as a sacred art object. It's not an art. It's not just like for a museum. And when it's not possible to do that, then a discussion with the head teacher, often the head of the lineage, then we decide to have it copied. And these days, you have fine sculptors and fine tanka artists and fine digital artists who can create replicas that then get blessed. And the originals can be put in the teacher's room or in the shrine room, or sometimes they're put in stupas as a consecration. There's a difference between preservation and restoration. And we totally respect sacred art objects with preservation.
Any other questions or comments?
First of all, thank you for organizing this. So when you're translating from English to Tibetan, is there any tool that you use sometimes, like Google Translate or anything? And if so, what tool would you recommend?
Actually, there are two translation applications which you can look for the vocabulary. It's very useful. One is called Samboja, and one is called Kakaka.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's very useful. Welcome.
And they're better than Google Translate?
For that, I'm not sure because by that time, Google is not really working in China, so we only have those kind of application.
I see.
Or there's another application called Baidu. I don't know if you heard. So yeah,
Cool. Thank you.
you're welcome.
There is a question from online. So please, the person who is online, wanna...
Hello, am I audible? Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for this very insightful session. And my question is directed specifically to Ma'am Shaftel. I heard about the difference between conservation and preservation, and I had a specific question regarding a village monastery in Zanskar, which is very close to where I live. It's in a village outside of this place called Kargyak, and it is outside of the more well-known Phuktal monastery. And I came upon this monastery just by chance when I was walking and exploring that region. And that monastery is in really a bad shape. And the monastery is constructed of mud walls, and it has beautiful wall paintings on all the four sides of it. But it is not well known. In fact, even a lot of locals out there, when I said, "Oh, is there a village monastery?" all of them were pointing to Phuktal monastery, which is more common. So my question specifically was, are there any organizations or any people that I can reach out to? Because I spoke with the village headman recently, and those people are looking for funds and any organizations that can help restore that monastery. Thank
And
you so much.
you're in India?
Yes, I'm currently based out of India. I live in a village outside of Manali in Himachal Pradesh. So like recently when I went, the winds had blown off the monastery roof. I mean, the present roof that they have is leaking, and the monastery is associated with J. Tsongkhapa and some of his disciples who were founding the Phuktal monastery. And the frescoes are kind of peeling off, and I mean, I did take scans using Adobe Scan and phone and all of that, and I would be very interested in sharing them with people who can actually do something about it, because it's actually heartbreaking to see that just because it's a village monastery of no particular importance, I mean, it's getting lost. And like you said, I mean, all art conservation and preservation is about future generations. So just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, and maybe just a few comments on any organizations or any places, because the local authorities don't seem to be particularly passionate about it. Thank
So
you.
you live in HP, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
So I've worked in HP. Now, our nonprofit loves to go to remote monasteries that are important to villages. And
Right.
we do. And what we usually do is have to do an initial assessment, do a lot of pictures and discuss with the village elders. And then we come up with an action plan that everybody agrees on. And then we seek funding from international funders. So I love small monasteries in villages and remote areas. I love what I find there, and I'm not at all put off by the challenges of a dangerously insecure building or wall paintings peeling off the wall. That's why we're there, to assist with that. Our nonprofit has a heritage architect. First, you have to deal with the building, and then we have, according to what we need, we work with wall painting conservators, text conservators, conservators that work on tankas and statues. So definitely, we are one of the few organizations that is not going for the big glossy monasteries. We love to work in remote monasteries that other people have overlooked. But we do have to find the funding to go there and do an initial assessment and action plan with the village elders and the local monks and nuns. So don't.
Is it okay? Quick follow-up question, ma'am. So I just joined the meeting because I came to know about it yesterday. Could I know the name of your NGO?
Treasure Caretaker Training, and it's a USA nonprofit. We call it TCT, and it's a USA registered nonprofit. So therefore, USA funders can help support projects like yours.
And is it okay if after the meeting, is it possible for me to get in touch with you on through the website, on mail? Maybe I can share some initial whatever assessment that I've done. Would that sound like a good next step, maybe?
Wonderful idea. I'm on Facebook. If you go on Facebook, you can get me on Messenger and also see a lot of projects we've worked on through the years, and Instagram and
Right.
LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much. I will definitely reach out to you in a day or two. I will share the scans and pictures that I have, and I am actually hoping that if that can give you a good enough idea, then maybe I can do the initial bit of reconnoitering and maybe putting you in touch with people out there, and perhaps that would be nice.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So is there any other questions or comments from either online or in the room?
I want to thank everybody for your interest in this, because the combination of science and sacred art seems unlikely, but because it comes from a point of view of devotion, then it works quite well. And again, the translation of that whole circle of how things work well together is crucial to what we do.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Pemakaudrola.
Yes, please.
So you're a native Kamke, Amdoke?
Amdokip, I can understand. Kamge, I can speak. Yes.
Chindu is both, or I thought it was kind of more Amdo, but it's both.
Where?
Chengdu province is both traditionally Kam and
Chamdo?
yeah, I don't know. Qinghai, what?
Qinghai? Yes, I'm from there.
That's traditionally Amdo or both
And
Kam.
Qinghai, it's a province. And there we have Kamba and Amdo.
Okay, and
Yes.
Yishu traditionally would have been what? What would its name be before in the Tibetan?
Gajie Kendo.
Huh?
Gajie Kendo. Yes.
Thank you.
Usually they call people from there, it's called Gawa. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question.